welcome. It's just not sure if it starts right there. Should know this by now. Hi. There we go. Cool. Welcome to History Chats this afternoon. We can get started in just a couple minutes. As always, if you're watching this live, just hang out for about 5 minutes or so before we get started at 12:30. And if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to skip ahead a couple minutes to get to the program. Yeah, but we're going to get started here pretty quickly. New year of history chats. Very exciting. Oh, okay, didn't turn that on yet. Cool. Yeah. Just making sure I have the feed up so that I can see if anybody says anything at any point. Feel free to, by the way, if you have any questions, comments, whatever at any point. I may be may not be catching those live because I'm in the middle of once I get into it. But hey, if I have any, if you have, there'll be time at the end for some question answers, comments, what have you. So feel free at any point if you have a thought, throw it in the chat or the comment section if you want to do that. I don't always say that, so it's always good to maybe restate it. Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, we can just go start like this. Well, we're getting started in just a minute here as kind of restate that, but we've got a new year, a new color for the background. Exciting. Maybe, I don't know. Something different. So yeah, this week we are starting off our month of history chats for the year, and it's going to be kind of on Wausau related things. This year happens to be the 150th anniversary of the city of Wausau's charter. So the city of Wausau has been a city since 1872. So we won't spend the entire year talking about Wausau because we already probably spend a little too much on that, but we will, do some interesting stuff about the Wausau area, and where better to start than Big Bull Falls, which is what the not to spoil the talk here, but that's what we called Wausau before it was Wausau, and we'll get into all of that in just a couple minutes. I guess while we're waiting here, let me tell you about what's coming up next week, because Gary Gisselman will be back, and he will be telling you about the city halls of Wausau, which we've had a few, and there's some very interesting stories attached to them, and yeah, it's an interesting sort of architectural and well, I mean, just also sort of a social place that people would go. There's a center for a lot of stuff, so a lot of cool stuff attached with that. That'll be next week at 12:30, as these always are. Yeah. Also, just to sort of let you know, so this month we're talking about Wausau related stuff. Next month we're going to be doing sort of a miscellaneous sort of odds and ends things. We're going to be maybe doing some stories that don't fit into a month-long theme. But we'd also be really interested to see to do viewer questions. If you're watching this and you've had something that you've always wondered about, Marathon County or Wausau or Mosinee or whatever, feel free to ask us. Go back and check the comments or whatever. I haven't quite set up a formal thing to submit those. That'll be coming pretty soon, I hope. But yeah, definitely be interested to maybe just cover a bunch of viewer questions about the history. If we can, illuminate some area that you've always been curious about, we'll do some of those. So just to give you some heads up there, that'll be coming up next month. So if you have those ready, if you thinking about it and you have a question that comes up in the next couple weeks, feel free to send that our way, and we'll maybe answer it for you. Okay, so I think we're about to get, yeah, why don't we just get going here? I think that this is a good time. Again, if you have questions at any point, feel free to put them into the comments section, and we'll do our best to answer them. So today we're talking about Big Bull Falls, which is the name both for the river where Wausau is originally settled, and for the community that arises there. If we're starting at the beginning, we do have to acknowledge that at the very beginning, Marathon County was created based off of, there was no Marathon County in 1836, but there were people living here. At this point, so this is the treaty with it's called the Treaty of the Cedars, and basically this is between the United States and the Menominee tribes. And so mostly it deals with this stuff over here. But it also, the second clause here in 1836 gives this little bit of land that goes up into what is basically Wausau. And it's basically the river, Wisconsin River, and then about 3 miles on each side. And the idea here is, hey, there's some good lumbering up here, so pinery. And we knew that there was some good places on the river to set up some mills. So this might be a good thing to do. There is the unusual, maybe you have to point out the fact that just because this map, by the way, is from the Wisconsin Native Ways program, kind of telling the story. And what this actually is showing is the land that was actually given to the United States. So these are the treaties with whom everything happened. But Marathon County was actually sort of, this area on the river was sort of a hodgepodge of different groups. Yes, the Menominee were there, but the Chippewa were there too. They're Ojibwe. Now eventually, by the time that Wausau comes into being, the United States will have also made a treaty with the Ojibwe to basically get this land as well. But it's unclear whether or not George Stevens, when he first comes up the Wisconsin River in 1836 or 37, again, it's kind of unclear based on the sources, but at some point he comes up with the intention of developing the water power here. And it's unclear whether George had the explicit right, like the government said, yeah, you can go up there, or whether he just kind of went up and then squatted on the land until they said, okay, yeah, it's you do that. But apparently by 1838, 39, he had set up some milling operations and getting stuff started in advance of the lumbering that would come later. Apparently with the approval of the Native Americans that were in the area. So granted, it was pretty small scale at this point, but it's going to grow. And it's important to note that, he could have chosen a couple different places. Stevens Point is named after him. This is, a point that Stevens found. He was one of the first Americans to come up and survey the area. And he decided to choose the place that was known colloquially as Big Bull Falls. Now, this picture here is actually, well, it's unclear. Different sources have said that this is potentially 1856 all the way up to like 1870. In likelihood, this is probably at its latest 1866, 65, somewhere in there, but it's probably earlier. Hard to know. But this does show the river in its natural state, or close to it. And you can see it looks very different for a lot of reasons. Lots more trees, a lot less buildings. And of course, the river itself looks a little different than it does today. Now, the reason that they chose this location, and there were a bunch of different falls and places that they could have done, but this is a particularly good place to have water power to harness it. So you'd have a mill that would, as the water would fall down the river, and just to give you a sense of the scale here, Big Bull Falls was said to have been sort of, the water fell 22.5 feet over the course of 60 rods, which works out to be about 990 feet. So if that is kind of hard to quantify, maybe this will help. That's a little over the size of a city block. If you include the streets on each side, it's a little over that. That's about 960, 70 feet there. So a little wider than that. And over that course of that scale, the water fell the equivalent of about just over 4 and 6/10, whatever, Guernsey, Holstein cows. I don't know if that actually helps, but 22 feet, that's a significant fall that they could then harness. And so then a community starts up here. They start harnessing the water to cut down the trees, and eventually we see the growth of the community. Now, in terms of the name, you might be wondering where the name Bull comes from. And there's a couple different explanations for this, but I'm going to use the one that was suggested, and I'm going to keep going back to him, so might as well introduce him. This is the Honorable Judge John C. Clark. He's an early pioneer, and in 1906, he writes an article for the Wausau Record Herald, I think. And at this point, he's like this. There's only one person who's older, who's been here longer in this community, so he's an authority on it. And so he's explaining the origin of Wausau, and he says that the name of Big Bull Fall or Bull Falls. Sorry, let me try that again. The name of Bull Falls, which is attached to nearly all of the rapids in the Wisconsin River, of which there are many, was given by the voyageurs of the American Fur Company, who, in going north from the Indian station at Dubay, or known as Dubay, heard a terrible roaring sound, which upon investigation proved to come from the falls, at this case at Mosinee. And here, the bull part is sort of, apparently it's supposed to sound like the roaring of a bull in the distance, when it, gets worked up. I tried to find some audio clips to show what a bull sounds like, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency on that. So you'll have to use your imagination there. That's where the comes from. So coming across this one at Mosinee, they named it Taureau, meaning bull, right? And in French, it's Taureau. Although he uses the spelling here, Taureau, so it's more of a phonetic spelling. Anyway, moving north, they found a larger rapids, and to them they gave the name Gros Taureau or Gros Taureau, big bull. And then from there, still further along, they encountered the Great Falls, and these they named Grand-Père Taureau, or Grandfather Bull. And from these names, all of the other falls have received the names they are known by. So, yeah, there are a lot of other names that have, basically any place that has sort of a rapids or falls on the Wisconsin River, kind of up, there's a lot of them. Jenny Bull Falls becomes Jenny Merrill. There's a Trap Bull Falls. There's, a Grandmother Bull Falls. There's a whole bunch of them. But these are apparently the big ones. And so they Americanized it to Bull Falls, big, and then little. Mosinee becomes little in comparison to the ones that were above, and Grandfather. So that's kind of where the names come from. There's some other explanations, but I think this makes the most sense in terms of not being a leap in linguistically. A lot of the early fur traders were French Canadians, so it kind of makes sense. They didn't actually spend a whole lot of time here, so the area wasn't super well developed. And actually, here, let's pull up. Let's do a little look at a map. So this is so there is a guy named David Burr, who was a draftsman to the House of Representatives in the 1830s and 40s. This is, for example, a map that he did showing the sort of Wisconsin area. It's kind of convoluted because we don't see the borders that we're used to seeing. I think this one is a little bit better because he only does it along the Mississippi River. But here you can see they're mapping stuff out. And if we go back to this one, if we actually zoom into where Marathon County would be, it's kind of undeveloped. They just kind of have some vague ideas about where things go. And regardless, if we look, there's not a lot of Squirrel Lake is up here somewhere. There's a Fox River down here, but there's not a lot of place names attached. They're just kind of like rapids with large rocks. There's a falls here. There's a falls up there. If we look at, another one here, this is from 41. It's a little bit more developed. You got Plover down here. Clearwater River. So we're starting to name stuff by 41, but still it's like rapids with large rock, rapids and falls. So I can't find any maps that actually show Big Bull Falls or Little Bull Falls, but apparently that was the colloquial name that then became attached to it. And so the community then becomes, here's a great example. Here's a postcard of Grandfather Bull Falls up in Lincoln County, which is still a place you can go visit. They haven't destroyed the rapids like they did in other places. The falls are still intact to this day. Probably a little different than they were back then, though. So anyway, here is, the new community that then, finds a home here. And over the 1830s and 40s, more and more people start to settle here, not just to, temporarily log the Great White Pinery, but starting to make homes here. And eventually, we are going to see a community arise. Just to give an idea here, this is also just to speak to the changes to the rapids, to the Bull Falls. This is the reason that I think this is before 1867 is because in 1867 they decided to improve the rapids by using some dynamite. It's funny how all of the improvements that they make to the river include some dynamite. But you can see all of these rocky outcroppings here. If we jump to another picture here from 1860s, you can see that as they raft these, take the logs down the river to Wausau or Bull Falls, they have to basically then cut them down and then reassemble rafts on the other side. And then they take those rafts further down. So if you have to like disassemble everything and then reassemble rafts because of all these rocks, maybe that's not the best idea. And so they use dynamite to kind of make it a little clearer in the 60s and then again in the 1870s. And then apparently in 1920, they announced that they would finally obliterate the falls with dynamite to make way for the dam. And the electric dam was certainly made it difficult to raft down there from that point on. But yeah, that's kind of the history of, to an extent, the actual falls here. Let's talk about Walter McIndoe, because at some point we have to move away from, we do move away from Big Bull Falls. We're not known as Big Bull Falls, we're known as Wausau. So how does that happen? And it happens because Walter McIndoe, who is, or McIndoe, now I'm in the moment having second thoughts on the pronunciation. Anyway, he apparently is the guy responsible not only for the name Wausau, but also for the name Marathon. For the county. See, back in 1850, he had been elected to the state assembly for Portage County, which is what Marathon County was at that point. And he argued for the separation of a new county, which he decided to name Marathon. He was a big, enthusiast of the ancient Greeks, and so he wanted to name it after, the plains of Marathon. And so that's how the name came. And apparently around this time in 1850, they also were, kicking around the idea. He tried to get the name Wausau for the city. Officially, it doesn't become Wausau until 1852, I think. It's kind of unclear. Like, I think they were kind of kicking around the idea. They kind of proposed it in 1850, but it doesn't get, like, officially on the maps until 1852. But at any rate, they choose the name Wausau, which brings the question, why? Well, the story goes that this is a native word. It's a Native American word for far away or faraway place, which might be true. I've kind of gone through a whole deal in the last 2 weeks learning about this, but so let me break it down a little bit. So it appears that this is Ojibwe, or for the Chippewa people. This picture is probably from the Menominee, although they're very close linguistically and culturally. And it turns out that the Ojibwe have a great online dictionary with words. So here, let me make sure that the audio good. And so there is a word, an adverb that says Wausau, and here let's play it here. It's pretty close. Means far away, distant place. The thing that stuck with me though is, why would they name it an adverb? This is like, I don't know, the first person to arrive and you decide to name the location after slow because it took forever to get there. Like, it's kind of a weird place name. Why would the native peoples call it that? And then I came across, again, I looked and found the Honorable Judge Clark's account, and he actually gives a pretty good explanation of it. So I'm going to read here. He says, in the early days, the Chippewa Indians were very numerous, especially in the fall and spring of each year. In the fall, they would move south in their hunting deer expeditions and would return in the spring on their way to the sugar camps in the north. At such times, they would remain in this vicinity several days, hold their powwows, medicine dances, etc. When they were asked where they were going and how far, their reply was always with uplifted hands, "Witty-wassa," meaning a long distance, a long way off. When it came to naming the city, the fact that Bull Falls, or the Big Bull Falls, was a long way off from civilization, it was considered a good reason for adopting the name, which at the time had a musical sound and enjoyed the unique distinction of being the only city in the United States of that name. So take that, Florida, Wausau, Florida. But yeah, so okay, Witte-Wassa, that kind of makes a little bit more sense. And I looked around, and it turns out that there is a sort of an idiom, which is, well, here, listen to it here. Here's another take on it. Um, it's kind of close. It's the syllables are there. They're kind of moved around a little bit, but it's not that far away from Witawasa. And I think there is something interesting about the way that that explains it, because the other thing is in the past people have taken on this explanation and kind of given it their spin. You know, the Chippewa are not originally from this area. They kind of migrated east, you know, in advance of the Europeans settling, you know, on the East Coast. And so sometimes it's said, oh, it's the distant, faraway place because they arrived there. But then why would they say, you know, Big Bull Falls? That's not really where they're situated. That's kind of at the exterior, you know, the distant part of their territory that they lived in. But this makes a lot more sense. It's sort of a joke. Hey, where you headed? Oh, long distance. Yeah, going a long way a ways. And so that just becomes kind of I don't whether the you know the white settlers were in on it or not. I think that makes another interest. And again, you know, once they understood what it was, it did feel like it was on the edge of civilization. So why not go with Wausau? And it's unique. So there you go. It's also just real briefly. Let's talk about this. What is the actual name for Big Bull Falls if it's not Wausau? Because there are some sources that say that, for example, it might be. Okay, here, I'm going to take a swing at this. Paja Takate Ninganing. Okay, sorry, that's really bad. I don't know if that's even accurate. This comes from a report by Hiram Calkins, who was from Wausau. He was a lawyer here who was very much friends and interested in sort of documenting the Chippewa people. And so he submits this, is asked to kind of put together a report on the culture and the Chippewa tribes in the area. And so in 1855, this gets published. It's pretty close to the time period that the Chippewa would have absolutely been around. So I kind of trust this. Apparently, this translates to the water that falls over rocks, which is okay. Yeah, that kind of fits the bill. Kind of like if we go back to you know this map. Well, rapids with rocks. Same idea. Okay. But eventually we stop, we have this new name, Wassa, wherever it comes from. The name Big Bull Falls kind of falls into a specific use to specifically the river here. As I said, by 1920, they've apparently dynamited it away forever. Although, we still kayak on it. It still has some falls. It's just not quite what it was in the past. This bridge, which replaced it's sometimes called the Falls Bridge or the Big Bull Falls Bridge. Excuse me. It stays around in the discourse a little bit here and there, but largely kind of disappears. Or so I thought. When I was going through the newspaper records, I found this group, which is surprising. This is like a fraternal group, I guess. This is from 1920, and then as we go forward, 22, 24, 26, 28, 1930. So these are, it's a group, and they're meeting. And throughout the 20s and 30s, after I looked into it a little bit, I found that it was the Beavers, which was like a fraternal society. It's like a reserve fund or a mutual fund back before health insurance. This is kind of one of the ways that you band together with people. It's sort of a social thing, but it was also like if you pay dues and you get sick, maybe they'll help out your family until you get on your feet. Maybe they'll help pay your funeral if you die. It's kind of a mutual aid. They come to each other's aid, but it's also, they have dinner parties and they bring in a band to have some dances or something like that. So and apparently the convention here, this is a Wisconsin origin here, down in the south of Wisconsin, the Beavers, and apparently they were the naming convention there was to call it a colony based off of what the old place on the river. So yeah, it makes sense. Okay, but outside of the Beavers, which seemed to fall out of favor by the 1940s, we do eventually kind of rediscover Bull Falls in a bunch of different ways. Bull Falls Park, a big Bull Falls Park in the 1970s. There's a big sort of resurgence of local history. If you watch the program from a couple weeks, 2 weeks ago, it was only 2 weeks ago. Yeah. When I did like the history of Marathon County in the 1970s, we start to recognize, hey, we should kind of be proud of where we come from and all of that. So, it makes sense that as part of the beautification movement in the 1970s, they decide to build a new park for the city. And, still today, it's on the island here, kind of overlooking where the falls would have been. So we do keep the name. We do kind of nod to that. And this is of course, I'm sure that you've this isn't going to be a surprise, but here's a couple other modern things. You got the Bull Falls, the Big Bull Falls Blues and Jazz Festival, which started in 1992. And adopting the name Bull Falls as a way of, keeping that history, kind of unique, interesting connection to the past. Continues to be, very popular to this day, which is very cool. And of course, then you have Bull Falls Brewery, very conscious of this. I know the Zamzos, the founders of the brewery in 2007, took a lot of care to make sure that the history, they reach back to our collective past here in central Wisconsin in a lot of ways, including with the name, And so, I guess this is all to say that, the Bull Falls of the old, like with everything, the name changes, the sort of ideas about what this is change over the years, but it's still kind of relevant for new generations. And so, that's where it all comes from. I think that's probably what I had here. So, yeah. Let's see. I will say, if you're interested in knowing more about the story of the river, if you're not aware, coming up later this month on the 22nd, we're going to have our first History Speaks of the year, and we're going to be hosting a little explanation about the history of the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company. I'm not sure who will be doing the talking. Someone from, or some people from the staff members from the WVIC, and they have, we were going to do this last year, and kind of kept putting it off. For various reasons, but we're hopefully going to have it done, or we will. It'll be on January 22nd. So again, this is maybe a more recent development of the river, but this is what sort of the modern, continuing the story of the Bull Falls, and more. So if you're interested in that, feel free to come back. And again, next week we'll continue the story of Wausau with the Wausau City Halls. Gary Gissem going to be telling you about the multiple city halls and where they came from and what happened there. So yeah, I'm gonna take a look if opportunity here. If you have any outstanding questions, feel free to drop those into the comment section, and I can take a look. Otherwise, just give you a couple minutes. I know there's a little bit of a delay, especially on Facebook, so. I'm just gonna, wait a second here. But again, I was thankful people join us. It's not. Hopefully, you're having a good new year, good 2022. I don't think I've mentioned yet. This is probably a good thing to mention. Maybe you caught this, but in 1872, Wausau became a city. And so actually this year we are celebrating 150 years of the city of Wausau. So there's going to be a whole year-long series of events. We'll probably not speak specifically about Wausau the entire time with our stuff here. We'll touch on it from now and then. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff that's going to be planned. Some events, some history spins on some existing events throughout the year. So keep an eye out for that. If you're in the Wausau area and you want to, see some cool stuff. Yeah. Don't remember if I mentioned that already, but if I did, sorry for repeating myself. I guess thanks for watching to the end so that you can correct me on that. So anyway, I think we'll probably call it there. As always, thanks for watching. Again, we'll be back next week with some more Wausau history in the city halls, and more to come. So have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you next week.